Godly leaders think before they speak. Godless leaders make foolish statements. James says this, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak. Godly leaders admit their mistakes and accept the consequences. Godless leaders remain proud and stubborn at all times. If there is a law and we break that law, there's consequences to that law. Godly leaders say, I made a mistake. This is what I deserve. This is what should happen. I accept the consequences. If you guys would turn there in your Bibles, please, to 1 Samuel 14. And we want to kind of finish up this story that we began last week on Jonathan and his battle with the Philistines. So just as a real quick backup, let's talk a little bit about what we talked about last week. Remember, the Philistines are this massive force that is assembled to fight the Israelites. The Israelite army has shrunk down to now about 600 people. Most of those 600 are hiding in caves, or many of them have deserted and have left. Some of them have even joined the Philistines. And then now we come to the part of the text where kind of Jonathan, who is Jonathan? Just to see if you all were Saul's son. So Jonathan, Saul's son, basically says, I think it's time for some action. It's time to move. So he gets his armor bearer, and they are going to go fight the Philistines themselves with God's help. And so we saw last week how that they had this strategy and this plan was, and they're going to get to the bottom of this cliff, and they're going to say, if they say, hey, come up to us, then that's a sign from God that he's going to deliver them into our hands. And so that's exactly what happened. They show themselves to the Philistines call them up, and then that's where we left off last week. So the theme of last week's sermon was on courage. We talked about courage and what courage looks like. Now we're going to see what happens as a result of his courage, of his stepping out in faith. And let's look at what happens beginning in verse number 13. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and as he came after him, his armor bearer killed them. The first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within half an acre of land. So they one guy or two guys now with Jonathan and his armor bearer, they end up killing 20 guys in this short or small space. So verse 15 says, and there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was a very great trembling. So now, not only is the armor bearer and Jonathan seeing some success, but God is stepping in the form of an earthquake. And so God's kind of supernaturally involved in this now. Verse 16, now the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and there was in the multitude melting away, and they went here and there. So the people are deserting. But then Saul said to the people who were with him, now call the roll and see who was gone from us. And when they had called the roll, surprisingly, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So it is at this point, there's some action, and Saul is like, what's going on? Let's figure out what's going on. And who is kind of causing this commotion, and who's not here that's supposed to be here? Well, they figure out that Saul is the one that's here that's not supposed to be here. Or Jonathan, and his armor bearer are gone. So Saul now gets spiritual all of a sudden. Verse 18, and Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here. And then verse 19, now it happened while Saul talked to the priests that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priests, withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to the battle, and indeed every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was great confusion. So what's going on here is that Jonathan and his armor bearer started it. Now the Philistines are confused, and they're literally killing each other. They're fighting each other and killing each other, is basically what the text is saying. Many of you have heard of friendly fire, or where you accidentally kill your own that's on your side. Well, they're killing each other in the confusion of the battle. They're in complete disarray. And this is not a man-made thing. This is a God-made thing. God is doing a miracle here and causing confusion and causing them to attack each other. Then it says in verse number 19, yes. verse number 21. Moreover, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp from the surrounding country, they also joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, they also followed hard after them in battle. So all these people that had deserted, all these people that had even gone back to the old enemy, or they had deserted to go home, or they had even abandoned their post and gone to the enemy, now are fighting for Israel. And so you have a massive turn in momentum. Whereas it looked like the Philistines had all the momentum, Jonathan steps out, God rewards his courage, now the battle has changed, and in verse 23 says this, so the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Beth Haven. Now this is where our text takes a turn, beginning in verse number 24. And the men of Israel were distressed that day for Saul. Now this is where everything's been good up to verse 24. And it's like I heard one pastor preach on this week. He said, everything was going good till Saul got involved. And what is going to follow in the rest of this chapter is this, and that is that you see a great contrast between two men, between Saul and Jonathan. And it's striking. The contrast between the two men is striking. They are both leaders, and they both lead differently. One leads how the world says to lead. The other is being directed by God. So I want to talk today about this issue of leadership. And many of you in this room, you're affected by leadership in one of two ways. Either one, you are a leader. Maybe you own a company or you run a company. Or and for those of you that are parents in the room, for example, you run a family. So you're either a leader or you follow a leader. So many of you are so grateful for a 4-day weekend or a 3-day weekend or the time off, and you are actually dreading going back to work tomorrow, and it's a lot of times because of who your leader is. Maybe your leader makes life difficult for you, and so it's this maybe is the whole time I'm going to talk about this, you're going to think about your boss, and I don't really want you to do that, okay? And say, man, I wish my boss was in here hearing this message. We all on some area are leaders, okay? And we want to be more like Jonathan. We want to be completely like Jonathan versus like Saul. But I will tell you this, that a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are totally contrary to the leadership philosophy that we have in America and in the world at this time. There is a lot of leadership books out. I am a leader, so I read a lot of leadership books. I read biographies about leaders. I want to see how that they led. And a lot of times, the philosophy that the world kind of pushes on us, that this is the way you should lead, is totally contrary to the leadership style of Jesus and the Word of God. And you can see a stark contrast here between these two men. One I would call a godly leader in Jonathan. The other I would call a godless leader in Saul. Saul didn't care about the things of God. He only cared about the things of God when he needed God in the moment. Jonathan is a godly man who is leading people based on the direction of God in his life. So we see the contrast here beginning in verse number 24. Now, I don't want to read the whole story because of time, because you need to listen real fast today, and you need to make sure your pen has plenty of ink in it, as you can see from the notes, all right? So let me just kind of walk through the outline of the sermon with you, and I'll kind of pull out the different points and contrast the two men, all right? One, godly leaders recognize that God is behind their success. Godless leaders think they did it. Godly leaders recognize that God is behind their success. Godly leaders think they did it. So whatever you have success on in your life, so maybe you're an athlete and you've seen success on the athletic field. And I don't want to discredit the fact that you worked hard and you put a lot of effort into it, and maybe you started a business from nothing, and you have seen success come as a result of that. I don't want to discredit your hard work, and I think that that shows great character and it speaks well of you. But ultimately, the reality is that any success that I see, that the world looks at success, it's because God has shown me grace and favor in my life and has granted me that success. And so everybody that has success, ultimately, God is the author of that success. What did we sing about this morning? He's the breath in our lungs. So whatever talents and abilities and gifts that I have, I didn't create that for myself. I didn't say, I'm gonna pick to have this personality and this trait and this work ethic and this. These are all gifts from God to me. So whatever success I have in my life, God deserves the glory. God deserves the credit. God deserves the praise. Jonathan understands that. Saul takes a lot of that success on himself. Like he sees himself as the key to the success that he's had in his life. And I think the Bible makes it very clear here. The Lord saved Israel that day and the battle shifted to Beth Haven. So it was God. Yes, were there soldiers involved? Yes. Was Jonathan involved? Yes. But who ultimately deserves the glory? Well, God does. God does. So then that's where we come to 24. And we see the second characteristic or contrast. Godly leaders care about their people. Godless leaders care about their legacy. Godly leaders care about their people. Godless leaders care about their legacy. Verse 24. The men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul placed the people under oath, saying, "Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies." So what happens? God does this miracle. The Philistines are on the run. So Saul says, hey, this is a chance for me to build my legacy. This is a chance for me to make a statement. This is a chance for me to be known as this world leader. So what he does is he used what I would call worldly philosophy to motivate his men. So he says this, nobody's eaten till we win. Okay? Nobody's going to eat any food. And he says cursed. He doesn't say exactly what's going to happen, but he says cursed is anybody that eats. So what's the motivation here? He cares about himself. Notice the language that he uses. He says, cursed is the man who eats any food until evening before I have taken vengeance on my enemies. He's making it personal. He's making this about himself. He doesn't care about his men because we're not talking about video game stuff here. All right? We're talking about this kind of warfare is hand to hand. Think of the hardest day you've ever had as far as working goes, whether digging ditches or whatever kind of hard work that you've done. I raked our yard yesterday, so I'm feeling it today. And, I'm pretty proud of myself and my yard. But that's raking leaves and doing that thing. It's kind of hard. That's hard work, right? Well, this is the nth degree. You're carrying a weapon. You're carrying a shield. You're fighting hand to hand. This is brutal. You need fuel is energy that gives us the energy to do what we need to do. So him saying you can't eat anything, that's a worldly motivation. He's thinking, man, they'll wipe them all out if there's food on the line. That's a worldly philosophy. He just cares about his legacy, where Jonathan, as you're going to see in a minute, he cares about the people that are under him. When I was in school, I took a leadership class, and there was a professor that came in every day, and he said, guys, I want you to repeat this after me. I will not use my work to build, I will not use my people to build my work. I will use my work to build my people. In other words, I'm not going to plant a church or pastor a church or lead a church and slave drive the people so that people say, so-and-so pastor's there and he's, I said, I want to use my leadership to help my people. That's really godly leadership. Godly leadership is caring deeply about the people that are under you. Saul doesn't care about his people, he just cares about himself. And we see that here in the text, where he's putting this ridiculous kind of restraint on them. Number 3, godly leaders motivate by love. Godless leaders motivate by fear. Godly leaders motivate by love. Godless leaders motivate by fear. So let's read. The irony of what happens next is interesting because who's leading them? Saul's leading them, right? He's put this restriction on them. Don't eat. So it says in verse number 25, now all the people of the land came to the forest, and there's honey on the ground. So there's all this honey that's on the ground. Honey is a great source of energy. When I ran track, I rang track too, but when I ran track, my mother would give me a lot of times some honey before I would run, just as a quick burst or energy. Okay, it still didn't make me any faster, but I did eat some of it. So here's all these guys that have been fighting all day, and they walk into this field, and there's all of this honey on the ground. Now notice, but nobody eats anything. Why? Because when the people had come into the woods, there was the honey dripping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. So how is Saul leading the people? He's leading them by fear. There's fear of, like if you have a group of people and their only motivation for doing the right thing is they're afraid they're going to get fired, that's bad leadership. Well, I better do the right thing or I'm going to get fired. We place these burdens on people, and then they fear firing or fear getting let go. This is the people are doing what they're supposed to do, but their motivation is fear. Verse 27, Jonathan had not heard his father's charged the people with the oath. Therefore, he stretched out the end of his rod that was in his hand, and he dipped it in the honeycomb, and he put his hand in his mouth, and his countenance brightened. So he's tired. He's been fighting. He's the one that started the whole thing. He climbed up a cliff, did some rock climbing. They had a battle, killed 20 people in a half an acre, and he's been fighting longer than anybody else. He walks in there. He doesn't know about his dad's oath, so he's got a rod to help him walk. He reaches down, just puts a little dip of honey on the end of his rod, takes it back up, no doubt wipes it off the end of the rod, puts it in his mouth. He doesn't know that he's not supposed to do that, and it brought him some energy. It perked him up, right? Then, verse 28, then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed is the man who eats this day, and the people were faint. But Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. Look now how my countenance has brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now there would have been a much greater slaughter among the Philistines. Obviously, if you have energy, you can do a lot more than when you don't have energy. I mean, we don't really need to talk about that, do we? I mean, that's kind of common sense. So he's saying, man, just think of how many more Philistines we have defeated today if people fought from a position of strength rather than from a position of weakness. So godly leaders motivate by love. Godly leaders motivate by fear. Nobody will eat anything because they're afraid of what Saul will do to them. Verse 4, godly leaders set their people up to succeed. Godless leaders set their people up to sin. Godly leaders set their people up to succeed. Godless leaders set their people up to sin. Verse 31. Now when they had driven back the Philistines that day from Michmash to Jalon, so the people were very faint. And the people rushed on the spoil. So they've driven back the Philistines. So in the Philistines, they would set up camp. And so if they're setting up camp, they have cattle, they have food, they have all of this resources to sustain them for days. So when you drive the enemy back, then you then go into the camp. So when they get into the camp, what do? The people rushed on the spoil. They took sheep and oxen, calves, and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. So this is a very gory kind of picture. These people are literally starving, okay? They have been fighting all day. And they're fighting. They're weak. And have you ever noticed that if you've gone a long period without eating, and then it's time to eat, look out for the cupboards in your house, right? You know? I mean, it's just like a bad strategy for losing weight, in my opinion, is to just not eat anything. Because I'm going on a diet and I'm not going to eat anything. So everybody's thinking about a diet today, so we'll talk about it a little bit. A bad philosophy is I'm not going to eat anything, because I'm telling you, by the end of Monday, you're going to have a Big Mac in both hands. You're kind of, in a sense, setting yourself up for failure. Instead, replace it with good stuff, replace it with healthier things. And instead of just going without. Well, these people are so hungry that they come in on the spoil and they literally start killing the sheep and they start killing the animals there, and they're just eating the meat raw with the blood. Now, this is a total violation of Jewish law. You don't eat the blood. But what has happened is Saul has put them in a position where they're weak, and he's put them in a position to sin. There's a verse in the New Testament. It says, "Parents, provoke not your children to wrath." It is difficult, challenging work to raise your kids. Make sure that you raise them biblically. In other words, don't push your kids to do the wrong thing because you didn't raise them right. Don't provoke them to wrath. Don't cause your kids to sin. And this is, in a sense, what bad leaders do. They set their people up to sin. Aren't you glad we have a Savior who didn't set us up to sin, but set us up to succeed? The contrast is great here. So what happens? Well, Saul freaks out because the people are eating all of this meat with the blood. So then verse 33, then they told Saul, saying, "Look, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." So he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone to make me this day." In other words, Saul doesn't take responsibility. It's not his fault. You have dealt treacherously. It's always somebody else's fault. And you kind of get this theme with Saul and this is kind of leadery, is verse 34. Then Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, bring me here every man an ox and every man sheep, slaughter them here and eat. Do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood." So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. This was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Now Saul said, "Let us go after the Philistines by night and plunder them until morning light, and let us not leave a man of them." This guy does not learn his lesson. What was the first lesson that he did? The first thing he did is he drove his people so hard. He said, nobody can eat till we win. Now they've sinned in the sense that they've eaten these animals with the blood. Now what's his second mistake? What do we all need? We need food and we need sleep. Right? So now he didn't learn his lesson. Okay, the first one didn't work out so well, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to eat, and now we're going to fight all night. You're not going to sleep. Number 5, godly leaders have a relationship with God. Godless leaders use God as a prop. Let me explain that based on what happens here. So he says, we're going to go all night. And then the priest, verse 36 says, "Let us draw near here to God." Saul, I think it was the priest's way of kind of saying, can we ask God what we should do here? Because I don't think this is a good idea. Saul's the kind of leader where you got to walk around on tiptoes with this guy. Because he'll go off, so you got to word it just right. So, what happens? Verse 30, so Saul asked counsel of God, "Should I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. So there's a big difference between godly leaders and godless leaders. Godly leaders have a relationship with God. If I have a relationship with God, if God is in my life all of the time, then I'm constantly communicating with God. In the good times, in the bad times, in the moments of crisis, in the moments of victory, if this constant in my life is God, then it means I have a relationship with Him. A lot of people don't have a relationship with God. They have God as a prop. So what they do is they go through their life and they live their life how they want to live. Then they come to a moment of crisis. Then they get Jesus. Or they go to church. It's like God is Santa Claus. And we go and we sit on His lap and say, "I want this for Christmas and this for Christmas," and God, I want this and this, but I don't want anything to do with you because I don't want anything to do with you outside of today or outside of you leave me alone unless I need you. That's the kind of relationship Saul and God have. He's a prop. So God's not answering him here. So Saul interprets it this way, verse 38. Saul said, "Come over here, all you chiefs of the people, and know and see what this sin was today." Okay, so he says, God must not be talking to me because somebody in here is sinning. And we're going to find out who's sinning. Now, who's sinning? Who violated his command? His son, right? So listen to what he says in verse 39. "For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die." So he goes, whoever sinned today, I don't care who it was, even if it was Jonathan, they're going to die. He's using his son as he's saying, look, if it's even my kid, I'm going to put my kid to death. If he sinned, if he broke the law, if he broke what I said, then I'm going to use him. Now notice how the people responded. But not a man among the people answered him. You know why they didn't answer him? Because they knew it was Jonathan. They're like, oh man, I don't think he realized what he said. This is another example of the difference. Verse 6, godly leaders think before they speak. Godless leaders make foolish statements. Godly leaders think before they speak. Godless leaders make foolish statements. Let every man, James says this, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Those 2 ears go into your brain. The thoughts process out. Watch before you let stuff just spew out of your mouth. I'd rather have somebody really quiet than somebody who won't shut up. Right? So think before you speak. And what happens is even as leaders, we get emotional. We get upset. We get in the flesh. And we say foolish stuff. This was a foolish statement. He did not say anything about killing anybody, but now he's fired up. Now he's like, okay, I tell you what, whoever did this, whoever is the cause behind the fact that God won't speak to us, whoever it is, even if it's my boy, he's going to die. That's foolish talk. That's Saul getting in the flesh, getting emotional, saying stupid stuff, and this, it's just foolish. Godly leaders think. Think before you post on Facebook. Think before you tweet. Think before you put something on Instagram, you know. I love vague messages on Facebook, you know. Don't be that way. Think before you speak. Don't use social media and public forums as an opportunity to encourage not to take shots, not to make foolish statements. Don't box yourself into a corner because you said something dumb. Think before you speak. Then the last thing is, godly leaders admit their mistakes and accept the consequences. Godless leaders remain proud and stubborn at all times. So let's read what happens. Verse 40. Then he said to all Israel, "You be on one side, and my son Jonathan and I will be on the other." And all the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." So this is what he said. What they're doing is they're casting lots. Now we don't really understand what that means. We don't understand exactly how that God would speak to them. Some thought it was through the high priest. The high priest wore some things that would, maybe rocks that would light up or indicate certain things. But we don't know exactly how this was decided. But basically, he puts all the people of Israel over here, and he puts him and his son Jonathan over here. And he says, okay, God, did the people sin or did we sin? So how did that come back? It says, and the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." 41, therefore Saul said to the Lord God of Israel, "Give a perfect lot." And Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. So in other words, however, God indicated the sin is not with the people, The sin is with you and Jonathan. All right? Verse 42. And Saul said, cast lots between my son Jonathan and me. So God, is it me or is it Jonathan? And who came up? So Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. What sin have you done that's brought this on us? And Jonathan told him and said, I only tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand, so now I must die. He didn't get an attorney. He didn't fight the case. He's like, look, Dad, this is the deal. I'm walking through the field. There's honey on the ground. I've been fighting all day. I'm really hungry. I took the rod down. I took a little bit of honey. I ate it. I didn't know that you'd given the command. But look, you said anybody violates that word that they should die. I'm ready to die. That's a different guy, isn't it? He admitted his mistakes and accepted the consequences. So you're driving down the road. The speed limit's 25. You're going 29. You're going 26. The police officer pulls you over. Says, you know how fast you're going? Yes, I was going 26. Okay, I'm going to write you a ticket. You got to be kidding me. It's one over. Were you breaking the law? Come on now. Y'all with me? What do? It's like everything in us rebels against the fact that we're getting punished. If there is a law and we break that law, there's consequences to that law. Godly leaders say, I made a mistake. This is what I deserve. This is what should happen. I accept the consequences. How did Saul respond? So you would think, okay, Saul is the main judge of the land. You would think, okay, I would have mercy on my son. He just didn't understand. I mean, we're winning the battle because of this kid. So how's Saul going to respond? Saul answered, God do so, and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan. What? You know what that's called right there? Pride. He should have said, you know what? That was stupid. That was a stupid rule. I shouldn't have said it. But you know what he does? No, you're going to die, Jonathan. I'm going to kill you tonight. You know what that's called? Stubbornness and pride. Do you ever talk to your kids and you fly off the handle? You lose your temper? Lose your temper with your kids? You ever fly off the handle and say a bunch of stuff, and I hope to God that nobody ever lays their hand on their kid. But we've all, look, I don't know a parent in this room that doesn't get in the flesh and raise their voice and act the fool. Can I tell you what godly parents do? They go to their kids and go, I was wrong. I was wrong. Would you forgive me? It's a humbling thing to ask your kids to forgive you. Because you want to be like, who pays the bills around here? You wouldn't have life if it were not for me, and you're going to have to overlook my issues. Right? I just think that's a bad way to lead. I just think it shows our pride and our stubbornness. So don't be frustrated with your kids when they're proud and stubborn, because you're proud and stubborn. Why won't they change? Just being like their dad. So the best thing I can do to model to my kids is, when I blow it, which is pretty frequent, the best thing I can do to lead my wife, to model to my wife, is when I blow it, go to her and go, that was really dumb. Will you forgive me? But see, we're taught in our culture, man, real men don't do that. I think real men do it. And I think real women do it. And I think real leaders do it. Don't show weakness to your staff. You lead them with an iron fist. This is a bad way to lead. And it never works out. Remember, so what happened with all these kings in Israel? Saul was the first one. Then David was pretty good till he kind of started falling off at the end, and he made some terrible mistakes. And then Solomon came in. And remember, Solomon was hard on the people, man. He built these huge. He had how many wives? Like 300 wives or 700 wives, and he built homes for each one of them. Who built those homes? Solomon? No. He got all these people to build these homes, and he drove the people hard. And remember when his son came on the scene, and the people came to him and said, look, man, David was hard on us, and Solomon was hard on us. Could you not be so hard on us? And so he went to the counselors. Remember, the older counselor said, yeah, man, these people have been beaten down for the last 2 kings. You need to take it easier on them. Remember, the young people stood up and said, no, man, you come down hard on them. And remember what he said? He says, I will be so hard on you that it'll be nothing compared to what Solomon was. Solomon can't hold a little finger to how hard I'm going to be on you. And what happened to the kingdom? It split. People are like, I'm tired of this. This is godless leaders. And did not Samuel warn them that this was how it was going to go down? You're going to have kings, and they're going to take your people, and your people are going to, the people that lead you are just going to care about themselves and their legacy, and they're going to use you. And the people said, bring it on, bring it on. And this is what happens when you have poor leaders. They do things like they refuse to admit their mistakes and accept the consequences. Instead, they remain proud and stubborn. Now let's see what happens to Jonathan. Verse 45. But the people said, so what did Saul say? What is going to happen to Jonathan, church? We're almost done. Hang with me, okay? What does Saul say is going to happen? He's going to die. The people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? I love the words in the next 2 words in the next King James. What does it say? It's on the screen, isn't it? No, it's not. It's in your Bible. Certainly not, is what it says. Okay, it says, they said, in other words, let me tell you something today, Saul. Jonathan ain't dying. Certainly not. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. You know what they're saying? Jonathan laid down his life for us. We will stand up for him. Saul, you're trying to kill us, man. Let me tell you why I serve Jesus Christ. Because I'm scared of Jesus Christ. I don't serve Jesus Christ because I'm scared of Jesus Christ. I serve Jesus Christ because I love Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ laid down his life for me. The least I can do is live for him. Jesus does not rule with an iron fist. He rules out of love, and love is a greater motivator than fear. And the people said, you will not kill Jonathan today. We would not be here were it not for Jonathan. Verse 46, then Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Now I love the last. So the people, verse 45, so the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. So I want you to kind of think about what kind of leader are you? What kind of leader are you? What kind of leader are you in your home? What kind of leader are you at your job? So I want you to do 2 things with this message. One is, maybe you've heard this and you've thought about your own leadership style, and maybe you're like, you know what? I'm more like Saul than I am Jonathan, and I need to change some things. And I want to ask you in this, when we have a minute here, and we're going to pray and talk to the Lord, for you to maybe say, I haven't been leading the right way. It's been all about me. It's been all about my agenda. It's been all about my payroll. It's been all about my bank account. It's been all about my life. All I think about is me and pushing my legacy. And I want to take a little time this morning, and I just want to repent of that. I want to ask God to forgive me. And maybe it may require you not only asking God to forgive you, But it may require you going to your job tomorrow and asking some people you work with to forgive you. I don't know how the Lord would speak to you. But I also say this. Maybe you are dreading going to work tomorrow because you're like, man, you do not know who I work for. Would you take this time and would you just pray that God would change their heart? Just pray that God would change their heart. And I think this is a great time for us to just kind of reflect and think about our own style, our own way that we live life, the way that we lead, and ask God to help us lead as He would have us. Jesus modeled this ultimately, right? He modeled it ultimately. We want to follow Him. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve.
Thank you again for listening to our series on 1 Samuel with Pastor Mark Dawes. If you have questions about today's message, please contact our church office at info@topekabaptist.org. Give us a call at 785-862-0988 or check us out online at www.topekabaptist.org.